We had the groundbreaking back in last month, and for a new concourse, it's a 5-gate concourse, which will give us about a 50% increase in aircraft capacity here in handling passengers. Where we're currently at is we're approaching 60% design. It's basically a three-part program too. It's a new security checkpoint, which will almost double in size. The fiscal year numbers just came in October 1st. And again, we had a record year, 3.1 million passengers. But what this gives us is it kind of dilutes that a little bit. So it's not as crowded in our current concourse. And oh, by the way, our current concourse was designed a number of years ago, and it was built around regional jets, smaller jets. And we're not seeing that today. We expect construction to take about 2 years, but we're at 60% on the design, or we're approaching 60%. And we expect we're doing some enabling, small-time construction, mostly exploratory around the area. And next, you'll probably see construction in earnest probably next May, June.
Hi, let's welcome Matt Coughlin, second time on the show. He's the executive director of the Pensacola International Airport. Good to see you, Matt, and thank you for joining.
Hey, Danny, good to see you. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, for those who are listening this for the first time, I'm going to link the first episode with Matt in the description of this video. We talked about leadership and his story from the Navy to the airport, but today we're going to continue our conversation. And first, let's start with some really cool news about the airport. You guys are building the new terminal, expanding the airport. So tell me where you are and what are the plans there?
Sure. So we had the groundbreaking back in last month, and for a new concourse, it's a 5-gate concourse, which will give us about a 50% increase in aircraft capacity here in handling passengers. Where we're currently at is we're approaching 60% design. It's basically a three-part program too. It's a new security checkpoint, which will almost double in size. We just added a 5th lane, so we'll have the capacity to go to 7 lanes eventually. But it'll be a new security checkpoint, and then basically walkways, elevated walkways over to the new concourse. And that, as you come into the airport, will be on the right side. It'll be 5 gates, handle larger aircraft, and we expect construction to take about 2 years. But we're at 60% on the design, or we're approaching 60%. And we expect we're doing some enabling, small-time construction, mostly exploratory around the area. And next, you'll probably see construction in earnest probably next May, June. One other phase of that project, too, is the actual aircraft ramp area. We have to join our current ramp with the new ramp, which sounds pretty easy, but it's when you have different elevations and whatnot from a engineering and construction standpoint, it's a little bit more complicated, but that's also in the project. So we're moving out on it, and look forward to, down the road when we have a state-of-the-art facility for our customers.
Yeah, that sounds great. And what do you think will be the impact once this is done? Does it mean more tourists coming into the city, or maybe in terms of the airport itself? What will it change in terms of the operations and its impact?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's going to give us flexibility. It's going to give us the opportunity, not that, we're talking to other airlines. We have 8 airlines here currently, but we are talking to other airlines. And what it gives us is flexibility to kind of move the operation around and make it more efficient. We're able to handle our customer load now. We had, the fiscal year numbers just came in October 1st. And again, we had a record year, 3.1 million passengers. But what this gives us is it kind of dilutes that a little bit. So it's not as crowded in our current concourse. And oh, by the way, our current concourse was designed a number of years ago, and it was built around regional jets, smaller jets. And we're not seeing that today. We're seeing the larger narrow bodies. And anyway, the new facility is just going to give us the flexibility to have a more efficient operation. But it's also designed to go out into the future. If you look at the numbers and how we've modeled it, this new concourse should take us out to the year 2044. Things change, as we found coming out of COVID, growth here was insane. It was crazy. And so, but that's just based on standard growth and what we foresee in the forecast here in the local area over the next several years.
And what do you think will be the economic impact on the city and the area as a whole? Because if we have more more people coming up, or at least there is an opportunity for that, then it can create more opportunities for the city itself. Is it something that you work on together with the local government, or how does that process work?
Sure, we work with our, the economic development entities in the area. But to your point, what's really, there's a saying in the industry: you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. They're all different. So what's different about us compared to our neighbors, for example? So from an economic development standpoint, a lot of our neighbors are really centralized around the tourism. We are a little bit more diversified in the sense that if you look at the passengers coming through our airport, about a third of them are your tourism and leisure travel. A third of them are everything else: industry, commerce, business travel. So actually, it's about 45%, 45%. And then the last 10% are typically your military travelers. So we're pretty diversified, whereas some of our neighbors are all about leisure travel, and the vast majority of their passengers are there. So what does that give us? It gives us a portfolio of customers that come through here are diversified. And what does that mean for the local economy? Well, it means that we assist in growing with them. For example, if you look right here at the airport, for example, we're currently building it's a big economic development project, a maintenance, repair, and overhaul facility for ST Engineering, I should say. They're from Singapore, but we're building 4 hangars. Eventually, it'll be 2,000 jobs, high-paying jobs. Right now, they're averaging over $70,000 a year. So those are good jobs. So if you just look at the environment here around the airport, we have these economic development projects, and the airport is going to feed that business. Not only will they operate here, but we feed that with the ability for their travel on a business level. And then if you look at the area, you look at some of the other economic development projects that are taking place, whether that's in the port of Pensacola, even over in Baldwin County, lower Alabama. So the airport's going to play a pivotal role in the growth of the community moving forward.
And does that mean that eventually there might be more flights from new cities or to new cities? Because sometimes in my news feed, I see these news. Hey, now like we have a year flight to Atlanta or to Tallahassee or Jacksonville, something like that. So does that mean that as the airport expands, there is more routes that people can take?
Absolutely. So, and it comes with new carriers too, because each carrier is different, So, for instance, I'll mention one of our new carriers most recently is Breeze, and they're doing a great job here, and they're growing with new routes, whether that's Raleigh Durham or increase in frequencies. And when I say increase in frequencies, that just means they already have a destination, and they see a added requirement there, and they increase the number of flights to that destination. For example, Tampa. It's intra-Florida, but it's a popular destination for us. Their frequencies have doubled on that route. So you'll see that. You'll see growth. One of the things we're focusing on is growing to the West Coast, because I think that's where we could use some routes. Our number one underserved market is Las Vegas. So we're working hard to get a carrier to start flying Vegas, and even the West Coast, San Diego, Phoenix is another big one. And so we're always working with the airlines to try to jump in the ring and take on one of those routes. But at the end of the day, the carriers aren't going to do it unless they're profitable. A lot of study, a lot of data goes into figuring out whether a route's going to be profitable. And there's a million variables that play into that. So we work arm in arm with the airlines to, help their decision calculus when it comes to picking those routes. But to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. We're going to continue to grow. We're going to grow carriers, and we're going to grow routes. The more we have, the better choices we have for our customers, and that's what we're.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you mentioned about analyzing the data and figuring out most efficient solutions. Do you have a dedicated analytics team or people who are responsible for that? And how does that work in your airport?
We do. We actually, on staff, we have our assistant director for strategy and planning, also oversees all our efforts when it comes to air service development. Air service development, think of it as business development, but it's about getting airlines and routes here. And Todd Payne is our lead when it comes to air service development. Been in the industry a number of years. He literally can pick up the phone and go VFR direct, as you say, to the airlines, their air service development and networking teams. We share data with them. In addition to Todd, we also have a consultant firm that's all they do is air service development. So we use as many assets as possible. We consolidate as much data as we can. We share it with the airline, and hopefully our mutual interests come together and it results in new routes.
Yeah, that's great. And, you have so many moving pieces here. You have, the airport itself, you need to establish operations, you have this research, you have a bunch of other things. And on top of that, there is always stress and pressure that if something goes wrong, human lives are on the line and, you have security and whatever else. How do you stay calm under such an insane pressure? And how do you keep operating and make the right decisions when things are uncertain and you have to deal with whatever situation it is?
I think it's a combination of a number of things, but I think my background being in the military is helpful. But really, what it comes down to is the team. Got some really wonderful people here. They come from all different backgrounds. And, part of my responsibility is just kind of set the culture or the tone around here and keep it a calm environment no matter how difficult it may be. It is a risky environment. Aviation's risky, inherently risky, right? So we have a lot of things going on from an operations standpoint. And one of our tenets is we have to keep a safe operational environment around the airport here. You mentioned a couple, but here's another program that we have to manage on a daily basis, and that's our wildlife hazard mitigation plan. In other words, we have wildlife here at the airport, and an airport is a really bad place to have animals around, to be honest. But we manage that, and it's just one small example of keeping the operation safe here. But really, to your question, what it comes down to is I got a great staff here. They share the same principles of calm leadership under challenges, and they're really good at what they do, and I trust them, and they've earned my trust. They're a great set of folks.
And when it comes to hiring and to building this team, are there any specific skills or maybe something you do to figure out whether that person would be a great fit for the team and for this culture, or how do you do that?
Yes. So when we hire folks, we spend a lot of time, acquiring talent's difficult. So yeah, it's a balance act too, right? And I just said we spend a lot of time to find the right fit. But at the same time, you have to be careful because there's a marketplace for human capital out there, right? And everyone's competing for that same talent. So you can't just take your time. You have to be pretty quick about it, and you have to be dedicated, especially at the more senior levels here at the airport. We do a lot of background, and a lot of it's personal interaction. Not only do they need to be a technical expert in what they do, but it's really about having them come on board, interacting with the team, and watching them too, and see how they get along with everybody. I think it's important, especially at the assistant director level. When we recruit, I will bring them in here and it's not just an interview. We already done the interview, but we'll spend an entire day showing them the operation, see how they interact with everybody else on the team. In addition, they get to interview us, right? So at that level, you want them to interview us because we want us to be a good match for whoever's going to work here also. So sometimes I view these interviews as they're interviewing us and we're interviewing them. We try to show them as much as the operation and introduce them to as many people as possible. And the whole time you're there, we're evaluating them and they're evaluating us.
Yeah, great insight. Going back to this whole, stressful environment, what was the most or one of the most stressful situations that you had to deal with as a director of the airport? And how did you do that? Just as an example, maybe some inspiration for the listeners who might go through other difficult situations.
There's always these short-term stressful situations when something happens, and then maybe a little bit they're drawn out over time. I would say an example of the ones that are drawn out over a little bit of time that are stressful are anytime you have to close the airport. If you have to close the runways or close the airport, that means people aren't able to come here. And it's only happened a couple of times since I've been here. One was Snowmageddon last year when we had the snowstorm, and the other was Hurricane Sally. So there's constant pressure from so many sides to get that airport back open, and understandably so. But at the end of the day, you got to do it in a safe manner, and get things back moving. In our particular case, what I always worry about a lot of times is once the decision's made to actually close an airport for an event, with that a storm, for example, is I worry about our workforce because they have to go home. They have to deal with that same situation, uh, but on a personal level in their families and whatnot. So you have to give them the opportunity to do that. Like if I have to make a decision, close the airport for a hurricane, for example, I want to do it with such a time based on forecasts that I can allow our folks, the ones that aren't going to be here through the duration, to go home and take care of their families and whatnot. And I think that gets lost sometimes with some of our tenants because they're going to operate right to the last second. They're going to, commit a lot of pressure on you to stay open to the very last minute, but at the same time, they kind of forget about their folks too, They have to go home. They have to be safe. So in a hurricane, for example, just an example, I have to start thinking about if you got to get people to get home, you got to start thinking about forecast winds, right? When are the winds coming? And what are the wind speeds going to be? Because guess what? Even though you might keep the airport open, the bridges are closed at X miles an hour. Our fire trucks aren't allowed to operate at X miles an hour. The air traffic control tower, and they're all different. They all have different limits. So you have to balance all this in your head and just make sure you're taking care of your people at the same time, because at the end of the day, you got to keep them safe and eventually keep your operations safe. And then try when you start to reconstitute or bring that airport back online. There's a lot that plays into it, and that can be pretty stressful. And then to the shorter term type events, anytime we have aircraft emergencies or things that happen in an airport with thousands of people come through here every day, there's always something going on. The key is just stay balanced the whole time.
Yeah,
Don't be
great.
surprised because anything can happen.
Yeah, yeah, great stories. Thank you for sharing all this. As a technical person, curious, do you in the past couple of years with, the advancement of AI or artificial intelligence and similar technologies, have you incorporated AI at all into your operations processes or anything?
Not so much quite yet. Now, we do have it when it comes to operations. We have incorporated AI in a lot of our video technology anytime to keep, obviously, to keep a safe operation. And a lot of that comes through with the vendors that we use, particularly the security aspect of what we do here at the airport. I'm not a technology guy like that, but I know there's so many opportunities there to exploit that and to use it to our advantage just to make us one more safe, more secure, and a much more efficient operation.
Yeah, definitely a lot there. And obviously you don't want to risk anything because, AI is unpredictable. It can hallucinate and there is a lot to balance there. Going back to leadership, as we talked about in the past, and as you mentioned here, you were in the Navy and you have a military background. What was the biggest lesson about leadership that you've learned here as a civilian, which was different from your military career?
That's a great question. So, Um, obviously for me, two different environments. And I think you can take from each one of those environments and apply to the other. So in my particular case, being in the military for 28 years, things just operate differently. And then when you come to the civilian world, you got to be able to apply. I think the one thing that I was careful on when I made that transition is that uniform. I took off the uniform and I had to at the same time take off some of the leadership techniques, if you will, because it's a different environment. You're working with folks that what might have worked for you in the military, not necessarily in the civilian world. But that's not to say if you have that toolbox in your head, you can use it. You know what I mean? And I think at the end of the day, it's about having mutual respect for everybody, recognizing their talents, giving them the room to operate in what they're experts at. And at the same time, at the end of the day, you have to hold them accountable, you know? And so in the civilian world, it's that accountability is where I think my days in the military um, helped in the civilian world because it's pretty easy just to kind of let things go, if you will, take the easy road. And I think what the military allowed me to do is in the civilian world is to persevere and kind of get through that. And it's hard. Nobody wants to hold others accountable. It's difficult. It's difficult for me. But at the end of the day, you got to think about one thing, and that's your organization and how you operate as an organization.
Yeah, yeah, amazing advice for sure. Because a lot of the time on this podcast, I love to talk about these skills from the military and how people apply them in the civilian world, and this is exactly that. So it's priceless. For our last topic question, do you have some advice for young people that you want to share? Those who are listening to this.
Yeah, I mean, study hard. Here's what I tell you. This is what I tell my son. Always keep your eyes open for opportunity. Opportunity comes in strange ways. And what might not seem like an opportunity may be a huge one. And the key is to recognize it and be able to recognize it. So don't always shut the door on things, and I could give countless examples of over my lifetime, but opportunity presents in the weirdest of ways sometimes. And the key is to embrace it. So anyway, and then the other thing is just work hard, study, make yourself better than your competition, and just you know,
Awesome. Well, great advice. And again, great stories. Thank you for joining the podcast again. Hope that, this whole project is successful without huge roadblocks. They will happen as usual, but without, critical ones. And yeah, thank you for what you're doing. I really enjoy, using the airport, and it's one of my favorite, probably my favorite ones in the country. So I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for joining the show today.
thanks, Danny. Always a pleasure.